So, Easter, and I am going to talk about Easter today. I mean, who would not want to talk about the real meaning of Easter, the Easter bunny and the colored eggs, the chocolate. I mean, chocolate's always a spiritual experience. But we know, too, that Easter is about this crucifixion of this Jewish mystic a couple of thousand years ago. And of course, in the Christian traditions, we've talked about this, they make this crucifixion a unique experience. But of course, the Romans in their time crucified hundreds of thousands of people. There was nothing unique about it at all. In fact, it was considered a very lowly, denigrating kind of death to give to people who were nobodies in effect. But a story developed to give meaning to the crucifixion, and that was the story of the resurrection of Jesus. And it's based on the physical resurrection. This is important in Orthodox Christianity, that we're not really talking about a spiritual resurrection, but a physical resurrection of the body, that his body came back in full human form. And of course, everybody is welcome to believe that. I suggest to you, though, that if you do believe it, don't read the Bible. It's going to mess you up. Because in the Gospels, they each refer to this resurrection, and each of them give different descriptions. For such an important event, you'd think they'd have it down, but each of them give different descriptions. Now, pretty much in all of them, some of the women involved with Jesus, and in some cases it may be one, in some cases it may be two or three, go back to the tomb. And in pretty much all of them, Mary Magdalene is one of those who goes back. And in the Gospel of Luke, she goes back, and they all, several of them do, and they all see this empty tomb, and then they leave, only she's still there, and she sees an angel that says, why are you looking for, in effect, Jesus here among the dead? He's not dead. And she turns around, and then she sees Jesus. She goes back to tell the others, and it doesn't really describe what she says, but Mary Magdalene doesn't have a good name among the Christians generally, and you can kind of understand that, because if you can picture when she goes back and she says, I saw this miracle. God, literally God on earth, I saw manifested in the greatest miracle of all time, and he came back in physical form. And the disciples would have said, well, what did you say to him? And presumably she would have said, well, I asked him when was the best time to plant roses. Because in Luke it says that she saw God manifested on earth in the greatest miracle of coming back to the dead, and she mistaked him for the gardener. That's what it says. She saw him, and until he spoke, she thought he was the gardener. There's another one about two of the disciples leaving Jerusalem. They're walking down the road, and they meet a man, and I've talked about this before, and they walk for several miles with him and discuss things, including about Jesus. And then when they stop for lunch and convince him to join them, and when he says the blessing over the bread, they realize that it's Jesus. And so these people who knew him for years didn't recognize him. Now, does that sound like stories to show a physical resurrection of the body? I mean, to me it sounds like there's another message there that kind of got twisted. And the message of resurrection is an old message, a deep spiritual message for us. One of the oldest beliefs, and because people from prehistoric times were celebrating the resurrection of the sun every morning. You know, because the sun died. It died at night. It goes down into the earth. And each morning they would celebrate and do ceremonies in effect to help the sun come back to life and come up again. And as people got more sophisticated, this concept of resurrection grew. And in fact, they realized more than that. They realized that in the summer, the sun was strong and hardy. And it started getting weaker and fading in the autumn until in winter it was virtually dead. And in spring, the sun would be reborn and the days would get long and warm again. And that was the resurrection that was being celebrated. In fact, as Angie mentioned in Europe before, and that's actually how it is around much of the world, spring was the new year. The Japanese have the bean throwing ceremony at this time of year. It's much like our Easter, a few differences except instead of using eggs, they have roasted soybeans. And instead of bunnies, the head of the household wears this scary mask, and then they all go to the door, and he throws the beans out the door, and the whole family yells, "Demons out, luck in." You can see a lot like Easter. But you know, it's the idea of this new time. And in fact, the oldest spring ceremony that's still being explored today, it's called Nowruz. And it's celebrated in the Middle East. In fact, it's said to go back to the time of the mystic Zoroaster. And at that point, the story was that this demon decided to eliminate all human beings and created this horrific winter that was so long and so cold and so dark that all of the people were dying off. And this Persian king, Jasmine, created this throne, and it was made out of gold, and he had it covered with all of these jewels. And then he sat on it and had these spirits lift it high into the sky. And it shone so brightly that it dispensed that winter and brought life back to the earth, and people could live. And this Nowruz is now what's celebrated as New Year. Some people say the term means new day, but the origin of the term is new light. It's a new light that he brought to the earth. And so this is an old concept, but of course we know Easter is a Christian tradition. And so what was really Jesus' message about this and about resurrection? Well, first of all, you have to understand that it's not about death. Jesus taught us how to live, not how to die. You know, you don't really need to practice dying. If you're not sure, I don't want to shock anyone, but all of us are going to physically die. And you can practice for it all you want, or you can not, and it's still going to happen. Living is the tough part. Living's the part that needs this practice, that needs this guidance. And that's what resurrection was about. Living, not dying. And what did Jesus say? Well, we know in the Lord's Prayer, he said, "Forgive us our debts." But as Linda mentioned, he didn't speak English. Shocking as that may seem to